The cold silence of deep space was broken by a signal, a weak, flickering cry from the edge of the galaxy. It came from a small, peaceful planet named Arcane Prime, home to the Arcani, a gentle race of thinkers and artists who had never known war. Their message, wrapped in static and fear, traveled through ancient relay networks, long forgotten by most advanced civilizations. Most never noticed it. Others ignored it. But the signal reached one place. It wasn't meant to Earth. On Mars Station Prime, high above the red planet's frozen deserts, Admiral Celeste Rourke stood in the command chamber, eyes fixed on the translated message playing on a holoscreen. The voice was soft and desperate to any who can help. "We are not warriors. We will not survive." Around her, officers exchanged looks, knowing what this meant. The Arcani were known to the Galactic Council, but they had been abandoned, left to face a threat no one dared confront: the Kruth, an ancient, brutal race that destroyed without mercy. No one had stood against them in centuries. No one until now. Rourke didn't flinch. Her voice rang clear: "Ready the fleet." Within hours, massive ships moved into formation, the Terran Defense Armada brought to full alert for the first time in a generation. Humanity had changed since joining the galactic community. They had learned diplomacy, peace, and caution. But deep within their bones, they still remembered Earth, the death world that had shaped them. A place where nature itself tried to kill you, where survival was a daily battle. And now, a helpless species had called for help. The humans responded, not out of strategy or gain, but because it was right. The massive battle cruisers and carriers of the Deathworlder fleet cut across space like silent predators, leaving behind Earth's moons and Mars colonies. On the bridge of the flagship TDS Valiant, Rourke watched the stars blur as the fleet entered slipspace. She felt the weight of what they were doing. They were going to a planet already lost, facing an enemy no one dared provoke. And yet, she believed in her people, hard, resilient, full of heart. As the fleet neared Arcane Prime, long-range scans painted a grim picture: orbital platforms destroyed, defense systems offline, entire cities turned to ash. No other fleet had come. No one had even tried. The message from the Arcani had gone to every council member, every neighboring world, and been met with silence. Only the humans came. The Valiant dropped out of slipspace, followed by a dozen warships and a line of support cruisers. Arcane Prime spun slowly below, its once beautiful blue surface now scarred with fire and ruin. "Scan for life," Rourke ordered. Her crew worked fast, sweeping the planet with pulse scans and thermal imaging. The initial scans found nothing, just rubble, dust, and echoes of what once was. Then, a faint signal, deep underground, shielded by ancient alien tech. "We have survivors," the sensor officer said. Rourke gave the order. "Prepare a drop team. We're going down." As the fleet moved into orbit, their presence did not go unnoticed. A scout ship on the edge of the system picked up the Terran signature and vanished. The Kruth would know. They would return. But the humans didn't run. On the surface, Lieutenant Darius Mendoza led the drop team through smoke and shadow. They landed near a ruined city, its towers collapsed, air heavy with dust. The entrance to the underground shelter was hidden, protected by strange Arcani energy fields. Mendoza's team used scanning drones to find the entry point, cut through the outer layers, and made contact. Inside, the Arcani were barely alive, tall, elegant beings with glowing eyes dimmed by fear. They backed away from the humans at first, uncertain whether these armored strangers were friend or foe. Mendoza removed his helmet, showing his face. He spoke calmly, trying to assure them. "We're here to help. You called. We came." An elder stepped forward, frail but proud, his voice trembling. "You are humans?" Mendoza nodded. "We are." The elder looked confused, then almost afraid. "But they say your kind is feared across the stars." Mendoza replied without hesitation, "Maybe. But we came when no one else did." The shelter systems were failing, power reserves draining fast. The humans brought in portable reactors, med kits, translators. As engineers stabilized the structure, others scanned the sky. Warning lights flared. A massive signature appeared on the fleet's long-range sensors. The Croth were returning hundreds of warships, closing in. The Valiant sent out alert codes. Rourke's voice echoed through the fleet. "This is it. We stand or we fall." On the surface, Mendoza received the message at the same time. The Archini looked to the sky in terror, whispering prayers. Mendoza turned to his team. "We hold this place, no matter what." As the Croth fleet warped into the system, black and jagged, like nightmares made real, the humans formed a wall above Archene Prime. The Croth sent a transmission, a voice like broken stone. "Leave this place, Terrans. It is not your concern." Rourke answered calmly, steel in her voice. "It is now." With that, the battle lines were drawn. The Deathworlders had arrived. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy would witness what happens when humanity answers a call for help. The surface of Archene Prime was quiet, too quiet for a world that once held billions. The sky above was covered in smoke and ash, blocking out the sun and casting the land in a dull gray. Burned cities stood like skeletons, broken towers reaching toward the sky like the fingers of the dead. Lieutenant Darius Mendoza stepped carefully over shattered glass and scorched stone, his boots crunching in the silence. Behind him, his team moved with caution, scanning every corner with their rifles ready and sensors on full alert. They had found the shelter buried deep under the city, but there was more to find: answers, survivors, and a reason for the destruction that even the humans could barely understand. The wind howled between buildings, carrying strange sounds, half static, half whispers, that made even the soldiers of Earth pause. The Archene enclave they discovered was hidden by layers of shielding so old that human tech could barely scan through it, and what they saw raised more questions than answers. There were signs of other shelters, other life signs, but they flickered in and out like ghosts. Mendoza and his squad moved to check a nearby signal, one that kept vanishing and returning every few minutes. They passed through a ruined market, where statues of peace and music now lay shattered. Mendoza knelt near a blackened wall and ran his hand across it. There were carvings there, symbols of the Archene people, gentle, bright beings who once believed war was beneath them. Now all that belief lay in ruins. The team followed a narrow path down into the wreckage of what looked like a public building. A weak pulse came from beneath it, something alive, something trying to hold on. "We're close," said Corporal Lynn. Her voice was low, eyes darting to shadows. Mendoza nodded, signaling to breach the lower floor. They carefully removed debris, their suits filtering the ash-filled air. When the last slab of metal was moved, they saw it: a young Archene child, barely breathing, covered in dust and holding a dim blue crystal in their hand. The medic rushed forward, scanning him, while Mendoza spoke softly. "It's okay. We're not here to hurt you." The child stared at him, eyes wide and glowing faintly. "Are you real?" he asked. Mendoza felt a chill. "Yeah," he said. "We're real." They brought the boy back to the main shelter, where the other survivors were recovering. The elder of the enclave, called Thalen, stepped forward. His face was lined with sorrow, and his long robes were torn. He looked at the humans with wary eyes, though they had saved his people. "Why did you come?" he asked. "Your kind is feared by the stars." Mendoza looked at him and said, "Because no one else did." Thalen nodded slowly. "Perhaps we judged you too quickly." Before more could be said, alarms rang out from the surface. The Croth had returned. In orbit, Admiral Celeste Rourke stood on the bridge of the Valiant, her jaw clenched. Red lights blinked across the tactical display as dozens of Croth ships entered the system. The enemy moved like a pack of wolves, fast and aggressive, spreading out to surround the Terran fleet. "Battle stations," she ordered, her voice calm but sharp. All across the fleet, weapons powered up and shields locked into place. The humans were outnumbered 3-1, but not outmatched. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. Still, Rourke knew the cost would be high. The Croth broadcast a signal, a single phrase repeated in their harsh language. The translator decoded it, You chose this death. Rourke replied, "So be it." The battle began with a burst of light and fire. Terran ships used precise tactics, hitting weak points and pulling back before the Kroth could swarm them. Drones launched in waves, spinning through debris fields and slipping past enemy sensors. On the surface, Mendoza received the order to hold their position and defend the Arkini shelter at all costs. They set up turrets and barriers using both human and salvaged alien tech to create a perimeter. As the sky above turned red from the battle in orbit, strange sounds echoed through the ruined city movement, signals, and the low growls of approaching Kroth soldiers. Mendoza looked through his scope and saw them, tall, armored beasts moving. In formation, their weapons glowing with cruel energy. "Positions," he said quickly. The team took cover, fingers tight on their triggers. Then the first wave came. The ground shook as the Kroth charged, but the humans held. Gunfire lit the streets. Explosions shook the broken walls. Mendoza fired again and again, watching each shot drop an enemy. Lin went down with a glancing blow, pulled to safety by another teammate. The Arkini inside the shelter heard it all, fear rising in their hearts, but they also saw the humans fighting for them, bleeding for them. Elder Thalon stepped to the front and whispered, "Deathworlders. They really came for us." The shelter began to power down again, its old systems failing under the strain. Mendoza radioed for engineers, but all units were stretched thin. He ran to the control panel himself, trying to stabilize the energy flow. The young Arkini boy stood beside him, still holding the glowing crystal. "This can help," the boy said softly. Mendoza looked at it. "What is it?" "Our memory and our hope." With trembling hands, the boy placed the crystal into a small slot on the panel. Lights flared, the system humming to life. The shields strengthened. The shelter was safe for now. In orbit, the Valiant took a hit to the side, alarm screaming. "We're losing the flank." An officer shouted. Rourke didn't blink. "Bring the carrier group around. Hit their engines, not their guns. Make them float." Terran ships moved fast, switching patterns mid-battle. One Kroth cruiser lost power and spun out of formation. Another exploded as drones tore through its hull. But more kept coming. The Kroth didn't retreat. Neither did the humans. The sky was filled with fire. Mendoza and his team pushed back wave after wave, their suits scorched, their ammo low. Still, they fought. Not for glory. Not for orders. But because there were people behind them who could not fight for themselves. That was enough. As the night grew darker over the ghost planet and the stars above burned with battle, both humans and Arkini realized this was only the beginning. The Kroth were not done, but neither were the Deathworlders. The sky above Arkeen Prime was burning. Flashes of red and blue lit the dark clouds as the battle in orbit grew worse by the minute. The Kroth fleet had arrived in full strength, a swarm of deadly ships shaped like blades, closing in from all sides. On the bridge of the TDDS Valiant, Admiral Celeste Rourke stood calm, watching the chaos on the main screen. Around her, officers shouted orders and tracked enemy movement, but her voice remained steady. "We hold the line. No retreat." The Terran Defense Armada shifted into new formation, placing heavier cruisers at the edges and keeping the carriers in the center. Earth's fleet was smaller but smarter, using quick changes in strategy to stay ahead. Still, they were losing ground. Kroth boarding craft slipped through the chaos, landing on Terran ships with violent force. Rourke knew they couldn't win in space alone. They had to protect the planet. Down on the surface, Lieutenant Darius Mendoza and his team were running low on everything: ammo, power cells, even water, but they didn't stop. The shelter they guarded was now home to over 100 Arkini survivors, including children and elders who had never seen war until now. Mendoza stood on the edge of the crater that used to be a government tower, scanning the horizon. Black shapes moved in the distance, more Kroth soldiers coming. "Get ready," he called to his squad. They quickly took position, setting up what little they had left: auto turrets, energy mines, and a few salvaged Arkini defense nodes. The wind carried the sound of war, the hiss of plasma fire from orbit, the low growl of approaching Croth engines. Mendoza turned to the young Arkini boy, Ren, who had helped restore the shelter's shield with the crystal. "You stay inside. Protect your people." Ren looked up, afraid but determined. "Will you come back?" Mendoza gave a tired smile. "If I don't, someone else will." Above them, the battle shifted again. A Croth destroyer rammed one of the Terran carriers, sending it into a slow spin toward the planet. The carrier's engines fired at full burn, steering it away from the shelter below just in time before it crashed into the northern ridge. The explosion lit the sky, and for a moment it seemed like day. Back on the Valiant, Rourke made a hard choice. "Divert power from forward shields," she ordered. "Feed the orbital railguns." Her tactical officer hesitated. "Ma'am, without forward shields, do it." The ship shuddered as power surged to the guns. A moment later, two massive rounds fired, glowing red-hot, cutting through space. One shot ripped into a Croth command ship, tearing it in half. The other missed, but forced the enemy to split formation. It bought the fleet time, and time was all they needed. Rourke opened a channel to all ships. "They think we'll break. They think we're like them, cold, cruel, afraid of loss. Show them what humans are made of." Her words spread like fire across the comms. On the surface, Mendoza and his team faced the next wave. Croth troops came fast, hissing and growling, weapons raised. The Terrans met them head-on, using every trick they had. Mendoza used smoke bombs and decoys to split enemy lines. Sergeant Lin, wounded but alive, manned the heavy turret with one arm, firing until the barrel overheated. Drones flew overhead, scanning targets, and dropped improvised explosives. It was brutal, dirty, and close. But it worked. For every soldier that fell, 3 Croth followed. The ground became a maze of craters and rubble, and in that maze, the Deathworlders thrived. They were born in storms, raised on harsh worlds, trained in fire. This was not the end. It was only the test. Inside the shelter, the Arkini watched with wide eyes, listening to the sounds above. Many had thought humanity was just another warlike species, dangerous and reckless. But now they saw something different. These humans did not fight for conquest. They fought so others could live. Elder Thalon spoke quietly. "We misjudged them." Ren, the boy, held onto the edge of the command panel, listening to the screams, gunfire, and thunder above. He clenched his fists. He wanted to help, but he knew he had to stay and protect the others. Still, something inside him had changed, something that would never return to how it was before. Back in orbit, the Valiant took another direct hit. Panels burst into sparks, and Rourke was thrown to the floor. She stood quickly, blood on her forehead. "Damage report. Shields down to 30%. Weapons overheating. Engines fluctuating." Rourke took a breath. "Then we do what humans do best. We adapt." She ordered the fleet to shift into a new pattern-tight clusters, overlapping fire zones, using damaged ships as cover for stronger ones. The tactic confused the Croth, who were used to clean, direct engagements. Human chaos became their weapon. One by one, the outer Croth ships were picked off. But the cost was heavy. 4 more Terran ships were lost, and hundreds of lives with them. Mendoza's squad was down to 5 people now, all wounded. The shelter was still standing, but barely. Croth reinforcements kept coming. Mendoza knew this wouldn't stop unless something changed. He called the Valiant. "We need more time, or we're done down here." Rourke responded, her voice rough but steady. "We're working on it." "Hold that line, Lieutenant." Mendoza turned to his team. "They're counting on us." No one argued. They took position again, knowing this could be the last stand. Just before the next wave hit, something strange happened. The ground beneath the city began to pulse, faint blue lights running through old cracks, like veins waking up. The shelter systems glowed brighter. Ren stared at the crystal he had placed earlier. It was reacting to something. Elder Thalon moved to his side. "The city? It remembers." The Arkini had buried their world's ancient power deep underground, locked away when they gave up war long ago. But now, that power stirred. Rook saw the readings from orbit and ordered all Terran ships to pull back from the center. The Archini core, hidden beneath the ruins, was coming online. Energy surged through the ground, blasting out in a wave. Kroth troops near the shelter were hit by a sudden burst of light, paralyzed, confused. Mendoza saw the chance. Now! The humans charged, pushing the enemy back, using the pulse to their advantage. Rourke smiled as her ships regrouped. That's our break. Hit them hard. The battle turned. Slowly. Painfully. But it turned. One by one, the Kroth ships fell back, retreating from the planet's orbit, unable to match the sudden unity between the humans and the planet they had sworn to protect. On the ground, Mendoza dropped to one knee, exhausted, armor scorched. Around him, silence. No more shots. No more marching Kroth. Only the wind and the sound of a planet beginning to heal. Rourke's voice came through his earpiece. "We're still standing, Lieutenant." Mendoza smiled weakly. "Barely. But yeah, still here." Above them, the stars flickered, the fires faded, and for the first time since the war began, hope returned to the sky of Archene Prime. The ruins of Archene Prime were quiet again, but it was not the silence of death, it was the silence of survivors breathing for the first time without fear. Smoke still rose from the shattered ground, and the wind carried the smell of burned metal, scorched stone, and victory earned at a terrible cost. Lieutenant Darius Mendoza sat on the broken edge of a wall, his armor battered, his face tired, watching the gray sky shift as the ash began to clear. Around him, his squad moved slowly, helping the wounded, clearing the wreckage, and securing the last of the shelters. The Kroth had retreated, but no one believed they were truly gone. It wasn't over. Not yet. From orbit, the Valiant hovered like a guardian above the world it had helped save, and within its steel walls, Admiral Celeste Rourke reviewed battle logs and casualty reports. Her jaw was tight, her eyes unreadable. They had survived, but only just. The fleet was crippled, too damaged to chase the enemy. Supplies were low, medical crews overstretched, and morale was cracking. Still, she knew what must be done. She called for a transmission to be sent to all surviving Terran and Archene forces. The message was simple: hold position, begin recovery, and prepare for retaliation. Everyone expected the Kroth to return stronger. They always did. But this time, Earth would not wait to be attacked. On the ground, Mendoza met with Elder Thalon near the shelter's entrance. The Archene leader, once fragile and fearful, now stood taller, supported by the memory of his people's courage and the strength he had seen in the humans. "You fight like fire," Thalon said. "But your fire protects. That is not something we expected." Mendoza gave a small nod. "We don't come to conquer. We come when no one else will." Thalon led him into the inner chamber of the shelter, where Ren, the young Archene, stood beside the ancient core, the blue crystal still pulsing with soft light. "This city once lived," Thalon said. "It still remembers how to protect itself. But we forgot. We buried our strength because we feared what war could do to us." Mendoza looked at the crystal, then at the scars around him. "Sometimes strength isn't about fighting. It's about who you're willing to fight for." Thalon studied him, then said, "There is more under the city-old systems, older knowledge. If we bring it back online, we may stand a chance if the Kroth return." Mendoza relayed the message to the Valiant. Archene Prime was no longer just a rescue mission. It was now a line in the stars, a place where humanity would draw its blade and hold its ground. Over the next few days, human engineers and Archene technicians worked together, digging into the earth, unlocking hidden vaults that had not been touched for centuries. They found defense platforms, hidden launch bays, even records of a weapon built not to destroy, but to disable enemies through focused gravity waves, an ancient piece of Archene science that had been considered too dangerous to use. Mendoza and his squad provided security as more shelters were found and more survivors rescued. Each person brought out from the ruins reminded them why they were still fighting. Meanwhile, above the planet, Rourke called a meeting with her top officers. Around the table sat tired men and women, each with burns, wounds, and eyes too sharp for peace. "We've begun recovery," Rourke said, "but that's not enough. We know how. The Kroth operate. They'll regroup. They'll strike again. And we're not leaving this world to face that alone." One of the captains leaned forward. "What do you suggest, Admiral?" Rourke tapped a screen. "We use the Deathworlder doctrine." The room fell silent. The doctrine was not official policy. It was a strategy built in the darkest days of the Orion War. It said that when peaceful worlds were attacked by predators, humans would become the hammer and the wall. No retreat, no negotiation with aggressors. They would hold the line so that others wouldn't have to. Rourke continued, "We take the fight to the Kroth. We build forward defenses here, integrate Archini tech, and train locals to fight. We don't just respond to cries for help anymore. We prepare them to never have to send that cry again." Her officers nodded slowly. They knew what it meant. More battles, more losses, but also a better chance at peace. On the ground, Mendoza and Wren stood near the remains of a Krothwalker, a massive machine with clawed legs and a shattered cockpit. "They're strong," Wren said quietly. "But they're afraid too," Mendoza replied. "They fear what they can't control. They fear those who fight for others." Together, they watched as Archini drones, newly repaired and reprogrammed, began rebuilding damaged structures. For the first time, Mendoza saw hope, not just in the survivors, but in the future. Then the warning came. A signal, faint but familiar, picked up on the edge of the system. "Kroth scouts." Not many, but enough to mean trouble. Mendoza sent the alert, and the fleet shifted into high alert. The shields around Archene Prime powered back up. This time, they were ready. The Archini activated old defenses with help from human systems, and the two species stood side by side, waiting. But the Kroth didn't attack. They circled at a distance, scanning, watching, then slipped back into deep space, testing them, measuring their strength. Rourke watched them go and said, "They'll be back. But they won't find us alone next time." She issued new orders: build a forward base on Archene Prime, share tech with the Archini, train local defense units. This world, once broken, would become a symbol, not of war, but of resistance. A line drawn by humanity that said no more. No more silence while the strong prey on the weak. No more retreat. The Deathworlder doctrine was no longer just strategy, it was a promise. And as Mendoza walked the city streets that now pulsed with light and rebuilding life, he looked up at the stars, knowing the fight was not finished but also knowing they would never fight it alone again. The wind howled across the ruins of Archene Prime, but the sound was no longer empty. It carried voices, machines, and life as rebuilding efforts spread from the broken shelters to the rising towers. Terran and Archini flags flew together over what had once been a war zone, now transformed into the heart of a growing alliance. Lieutenant Darius Mendoza stood on a platform above the city, watching cargo drones rise into the sky and workers fill the streets. His armor was polished now, his wounds healed, but his eyes carried the weight of too many memories. The price of survival had been high, and he knew more would come. A message came from Orbit. Admiral Rourke was arriving to inspect the defenses. Mendoza nodded to the officer beside him and headed toward the landing pad, passing soldiers training alongside Archini guards. Children ran past them, laughing, as though war had never touched the soil. Mendoza wished that illusion could last. When the Valiant touched down, its hull showed new repairs, but scars still remained, deep lines burned into the steel, a reminder that Earth's fleet had bled for this peace. Rourke stepped out with her command team, her presence calm but cold, like the quiet before a storm. She shook Mendoza's hand and looked out over the city. "It's stronger than I expected," she said. "They're learning fast," Mendoza replied. "They've had good teachers." They walked through the streets, Rourke listening carefully to reports from engineers and defense teams. The Archini had activated more of their old systems, integrating them with Terran tech. Orbiting satellites now formed a protective net, and surface weapons could target anything approaching the planet. It should have felt secure, but something still felt wrong. That night, a scout ship detected movement beyond the edge of the system. 3 Kroth vessels fast, silent, and showing no signs of communication. They were not attacking. Not yet. They were watching. Rourke ordered Mendoza to prepare a response team. If they come close, we intercept. No mercy, she said. But Mendoza hesitated. What if they're not here to fight? Rourke narrowed her eyes. The Kroth don't come to talk. Still, Mendoza requested permission to lead the intercept himself, and Rourke allowed it on.